Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Gina, and I call myself a design systems advocate. Currently at Asana, I manage the designers on design systems and accessibility. I also founded Clarity, a design systems conference, and I'm a core team designer on SAS, my favorite CSS preprocessor. I'm a core chair for the Design Tokens W3C community group. And finally, I'm also a member of the Google Developers Experts Program as a web technologies expert. I've been doing design systems a long time, since my internship at Odin, which was a marketing and design agency in Memphis, to now at my current position. And throughout my career, I've done both design and front-end development. I should mention right now that this presentation will discuss a little bit of code, which I know, blasphemy at Nocode Conf, but bear with me, it's light and it's part of the story. So speaking of code, I've often heard the age-old question, should designers code? This isn't really a talk about that though. I am a designer who codes, and I enjoy designing directly in code. But I'm also a designer who no codes, and I enjoy that as well. So sometimes when I make websites, like this website for SAS, I'm doing everything in code. The site was built on the Ruby-based static site generator called Middleman, and I was writing mostly HTML, CSS, and SAS, and layout and modules wrapped in Ruby. But sometimes when I make websites, I use no-code tools like Webflow. This is a website for Clarity, my design systems conference, and it was built in Webflow. I enjoy being a hybrid, which is why I enjoy being in design systems. I feel that hybrids truly have a home in design systems. They can wear both hats, but not everyone in design systems are hybrids. You often have a collaboration between designers and developers, sometimes even on different teams. So this is a talk about better inclusive collaboration. Our industry has come a long way towards this. You might be familiar with the ongoing questions that bounce back and forth. Where are the icons? What color is the button border? Where are the icons? I experienced this a lot earlier in my career, and I'm sure you have too. A lot of organizations have a developer handoff process, sometimes known as throwing designs over the wall. I also remember the painful, tedious process of creating redline specs. That's where you define all the sizing, spacing, colors, and so on. And that can get pretty darn tedious, especially when designing on an enterprise scale. These were some of the red lines we had at Salesforce before we launched the design system. The problem with this is that it came down to leaving too much room for interpretation in between design and implementation. Spacing values were vague, colors were approximate, etc. So what we ended up with was a proliferation of similar but not quite the same property values. An audit of our code base revealed the following. We had 106 unique text colors. We had 120 unique background colors and 73 unique font sizes. We knew we had our work cut out for us, and design systems was our answer. And we weren't alone. Lots of companies created and published their design systems publicly. Some of my favorites from Salesforce, of course, I worked there, but also Google, IBM, Shopify, Adobe, GitHub, just to name a few. In the ever so hot right now world of design systems, one of the most common phrases you'll likely hear is bridging the gap between designers and engineers. This was on several resumes I reviewed during my time at Salesforce when we were hiring for the Lightning Design System team. It's a fair endeavor to strive for, as we want to bring alignment, coherence, and unity to our product design and engineering, all with the goal of having a quality, consistent experience for the people using our products and services. However, bridging the gap still implies that there is a gap. Why is that gap there in the first place? Is it due to many years of legacy process and workflows that still seep into our day-to-day work? I could see legacy being a real-world scenario need to work through. But what about newer, smaller startups? Why do many of them have a gap too? I'm very keen to see our design tools move away from simply bridging gaps and more towards closing them. For example, a feature I see as only bridging the gap is what's commonly referred to as developer handoff. Usually design tools that have this rely on pixel dimensions and hex codes delivered as a spec. In my experience, delivering specs like this can promote duplication in code, inconsistencies, and are prone to errors. An example of closing the gap, however, are tools that work with real, actual quality code instead of vector boxes. This is much better than the earlier WYSIWYG or what you see is what you get editors of the past, because their generated code can be accessible and production quality. And that's not to leave out the design tools like Adobe XD, Figma, Framer, Sketch, UXPin, and many, many more that are also doing a lot to move process forward. Design tools are bringing in smarter, automated ways to check for color contrast and other accessibility issues that can be detected early on. And many of them are now doing that with design tokens. So just in case you haven't heard of design tokens, they are a single source of truth to name and store a design decision, such as color, typography, or spacing. And that gets distributed across design tools and coding languages. This practice came from Salesforce, but they are now widely adopted in many public design systems, and they are even being integrated in design tools. This is many design systems practitioners' main method for achieving a level of abstraction that can be used in both code and design. Tokenizing and abstracting these design decisions allow them to be distributed across design tools and code languages. And if you don't know what I mean by tokenizing, it's similar to what people do when they're localizing text. So if you were to localize a string of text, you tokenize it, pass in the English version of that text, then you can also pass through other languages. It's like a label or a symbol or a nickname for that text. So this is that same concept, but for design. Most people are familiar with variables, which is something you can use in CSS or CSS preprocessors, but tokens do a little more than that. This is amazing for better communication and collaboration. In other words, designers, engineers, and multidisciplinary teams can collaborate and speak the same language and stay in sync across tools and languages. It's agnostic. It's like Rosetta Stone, to borrow a metaphor from my friend Peter. So I mentioned design tokens coming from Salesforce. This is the docs on the Salesforce Lightning Design System website. And the two common design token translation tools are Salesforce's Theo, which was the first one, and Amazon's Style Dictionary, which has gotten a lot of traction in the community. Basically, the way they work is you have token names and values stored as the single source of truth, often in JSON or YAML. This data is then parsed with a token translation tool to the various formats we need. So for a web app, you likely use Sass or another CSS preprocessor, or just straight up CSS. For mobile platforms, you have Swift and XML, and then your internal documentation may use TypeScript or JavaScript. Unfortunately, these tools right now don't have a great way to parse tokens for design tool features like Figma color styles, but that is changing. And at this point of our process, we determined that we didn't have to. Design tokens close that gap by providing a common language between designers and engineers. The tools do the work to distribute your design decisions. So the tools I mentioned earlier are a bit dev-centric, but there are designer-friendly tools that you can add into the mix. You have Figma Tokens, which is a plugin that lets you bring tokens into your design files. And you also have tools that help you maintain your design tokens, much like a content management system. So this one is Specify. And this one is Arcade. And what's cool about Arcade is it actually integrates with existing dev-centric tools like Theo or Style Dictionary. So you can add them to your process rather than replacing your process. And it's been awesome seeing big organizations adopt design tokens and include them in their public design system documentation websites. This one is for Adobe Spectrum. And very recently, Google added a section for their material design guidelines. I was pretty excited to see this. I love tools like this because they do more than bridging an existing gap. I feel they actually remove the gap altogether, and that's pretty exciting. So speaking of those design documentation websites or style guide websites or pattern library websites, whatever you want to call them, I want to touch on a concept of invisible design systems. So in the design systems work we do, you often think of these style guides or component libraries or a design tool UI kit. And there are arguments on whether either of those things can be called a design system. If it doesn't include this thing or that other thing, We even talk about whether design systems are products or more of a service. I would argue that these artifacts are not the design system. They are simply a representation of it. The actual system is invisible. When you're doing design systems work in your organization, you're actually building a community. This involves shared language and nomenclature, an aligned purpose, and better, closer collaboration. It doesn't have to be a style police situation. I actually very much dislike the term governance. This can be a joint effort, co-creating and working together to share the ownership of design systems together. And to be clear, this is not me saying don't build a style guide website or don't make a UI kit. Use whatever works best for your organization. But this is essentially a call to put focus on the people using our products. So my suggestion is to move away from thinking of design systems as an actual thing, especially when it comes to a negative perception I've seen on design Twitter of spending way too much time on these, and more as a way of working better, more efficiently, and more creatively so that we can build experience for our users, and to think about design systems as more of a practice. So I like to repeat in my work, design systems are for people, because it's a call to cherish, support, and empower the people you serve, both internally and externally. So coming back to the shared language, design tokens help facilitate that. There are many ways to name and categorize your tokens that can be opinionated, but it's good to get aligned across design and engineering. At Asana, where I am now, a color token is broken down into 4 pieces of semantic information: sentiment, usage, prominence, and interaction. So the only one required is the usage, like background, text, border, and then you can tack on to the other parts if needed to combine them to form a token name. So the first prefix option is sentiment, which refers to the feeling of what is being conveyed. We wanted to capture this because in our product, there's a strong correlation between the sentiment and the hue of the color. For example, default refers to a neutral palette for general UI Chrome. The success sentiment references a green palette, and the warning sentiment references a yellow palette, and the danger sentiment references a red palette, and so on. The next part, which is required, is the usage. This refers to where a color is used on a component. So for example, background, text, icon, or border color. We can use this to determine that text and icon colors have sufficient contrast between background colors. The next suffix is prominence, which refers to how prominent the component is in the product. And the final suffix is interaction. So this is stuff like hover, active, or disabled. Then putting all of these together, you get the final token name, which is sentiment, usage, prominence, interaction. So for example, in our product, we have a selected toggle button that looks like this in the upper left corner when it's being hovered. To capture its text color semantically, we would combine the following pieces. Sentiment is selected, usage is text, prominence is default, and interaction is hover. So our token name would be selected text default hover. However, we omit default for various technical reasons, so the final name is actually selected text hover. Another quick example, in our app, we have a warning top bar component that looks like this in the top left. We needed a token to capture its background color. So using our token naming convention, we get warning, background, strong. So here's an example of a background and text token that exists in the context of a selected sentiment. And then we add on the hover state for the stronger shades. And then you can see below how we represented that in Figma through the naming of our color styles. Our color tokens are stored as Figma color styles and grouped by sentiment because of how strongly it correlates to hue in our product. And here we have the default sentiment tokens, which is the neutral palette used for a UI Chrome. Notice how each token corresponds to 2 values. For example, the text token is a dark color in light mode, and a light color and dark mode. An important artifact of this system is that designers only need to design a single mode. In practice at Asana, designers typically design in light mode, and there's no need to also design for dark mode. And here you can see the success sentiment tokens, which are green, the warnings sentiment tokens, which are yellow, danger, which are red, selected, which are blue, upsell, which are yellow, and beta, which is purple. And working at that level of abstraction, tokens gives us an ability to not concern ourselves with the specific value that these tokens correspond to. So as long as you're using the appropriate tokens, the colors work. And this also gives you the levers to pull to explore other themes. So here you can see an example of maroon mode on the right, which corresponded to the dark mode on the left. This was something that Paul and Ivy, who are designers and developers on my team, wanted to play around with, and they were able to get this up very quickly. So how does this all relate to no-code? We have certainly seen a rise in declarative visual development. The no-code movement, as I'm sure you know, is not new, but it's growing rapidly. And we know that this opens a lot of opportunities for non-coders to make cool things. You can automate workflows with Asana automations or if this and that or Zapier. You can build apps from spreadsheet data with tools like Amazon Honeycode or Glide. And MailChimp not only has its own automation rules you can set up, but even just sending out email campaigns are easy to do without code. And there's much you can do without writing code at all. Speaking of Amazon Honeycode, I worked on that during my time at Amazon, and it really opened up my world as a designer who codes to not have to rely on code for everything. But that's visual development. What has me really excited is around design systems and the design tools that we use to build them. And I'm seeing a rise in smarter, code-driven design tools. I've seen some concern about these tools. I mentioned WYSIWYG before. The WYSIWYG editors of the past kind of got a bad rap. But tools are a lot smarter now and much more integrated. You've got modules, which is a design tool that doesn't draw vector boxes, but uses real code that you can use in your front-end library. Similarly, you have Interplay with a similar mission and uses design tokens to power much of it. Supernova has a similar mission as well. And of course, shout out to Webflow for its great design tool embedded in its site builder. I actually learned CSS Grid better by using its grid layout editor. So you can say that a no-code tool helped me learn how to code. I think the difference between the WYSIWYG editors of the past and the new tools that are coming out today is that they strive to make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. That's a phrase we used a lot on the Salesforce Lightning design system team. So for example, I love Webflow's accessibility audits and hints as you're designing. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of engineers disagree with me when I talk about this. And they talk about engineers becoming obsolete. And I don't think that's the case. I love writing code, and I love seeing other designers code. I enjoy working closely with engineers as well. I'm not saying we shouldn't code at all, but I'm excited to see us move away from a slower, throw your designs over a wall process. I want to see people able to make things without the requirement to code. It will also be nice to move away from that tired argument of should designers code, and we can all move towards what we can make together. So how can we move beyond should designers code? And for that matter, should designers no code? I think the much better question, and my whole point of this entire presentation is through better inclusive collaboration, smarter design tools, and a shared language, what can we make together? Thank you.